In this topic, we'll be looking at task R4, the authorization decision. In this task, we determine if the risk from the operation or use of the information system or the provision or use of common controls is acceptable. Potential inputs for this task include risk responses for determined risks. Expected outputs for this task are the authorization to operate, authorization to use, or common control authorization. And if it goes the way we don't want it to go, it's going to be a denial of authorization to operate, a denial of authorization to use, or a denial of common control authorization. So the output of this task is actually the authorization decision for the common control set we're building or the information set we're trying to put into production. Primary responsibility for this task is the authorizing official, and only the authorizing official. This can't be delegated. It's supported by the senior accountable official for risk management, the risk executive, the chief information officer, the senior agency information security officer, the senior agency official for privacy, and the authorizing official's designated representative. It does align to the SDLC. For a new system, it aligns with implementation and assessment, and for an existing system, it aligns with operations and maintenance. It does not, however, align to the cybersecurity framework. So let's dive into this. The book says the explicit acceptance of risk is the responsibility of the authorizing official and cannot be delegated to other officials within the organization. The authorizing official considers many factors when deciding if the risk to the organization's operations, including missions, functions, image, and reputations, and assets, individuals, other organizations, or the nation is acceptable. Does this by balancing security and privacy considerations with mission and business needs paramount to achieving an acceptable risk-based authorization decision. So we got a bunch of stuff going on the screen. First of all, the most important thing, this is the responsibility of the AO, or the authorizing official, and cannot be delegated to anyone else. They're accepting the risk of the system going forward and being placed into the production environment. For that, they accept all of the risk of the system, and if anything should go bad, that risk or that issue, something that happens in the future, all goes back to the AO. They are shouldering all of the responsibility for the system going live into production. So to do this, they've got to consider a bunch of factors, and they've got to weigh them against the mission or the business need, the organization's requirement to have this system up and running. So it's a balancing act, and they place kind of their neck on the line to determine if the system goes forward or if we deny it going forward. When we talk about systems, we also mean common control sets. The authorizing official uses an authorization decision for the system or for the organization designated common controls after reviewing the information from the authorization package, input from other organizational officials, like we did back in task R2, and other relevant information that may affect the authorization decision. The authorization package provides the most current information on the security and privacy posture of the system or common controls. That's why it's important to have the most complete authorization package you can have. Make sure all of the information is accurate and it gives a valid, up-to-date picture of what the information system or common control set looks like, so that the authorizing official has the correct information to move forward with. The authorizing official consults with the senior accountable official for risk management or the risk executive function prior to making the final authorization decision for the information system or the common control set. So when they think they've came to a conclusion, they check in with the senior accountable official for risk management or risk executive function to determine if there's anything they might have missed and to get that final consultation before making that decision. Because there are potentially significant dependencies among organizational systems and with external systems, the authorization decision for individual systems consider the current residual risk, organizational plans of action and milestones, and the risk tolerance of the organization. So in the old versions of making certification and accreditation decisions, we looked at information systems in isolation. That no longer happens. Under the RMF, we look at the information system and how it interacts with other systems, the organization, and any existing plans of action and milestones that may create additional risks for the organization that they're not willing to accept. So we have to look at the information system in its operational state and how it's interacting with the organization and other systems. So it may change the way we look at risk for the system when we look at it this way. The authorization decision is conveyed by the authorizing official to the system owner or common control provider and other organizational officials as appropriate. So when the AO makes a decision, they send that decision to the system owner or the common control provider as appropriate. And then as well, they send it to other officials that need to know that this system is going live. This could be folks that are doing continuous monitoring. These could be folks that are in the Security Operations Center. These could be the folks that are doing configuration management or monitoring the network for rogue systems. We want to make sure all of these people know, and probably some other folks, that this system is going live on the environment. We also want to let them know if the system should not go live on the environment, so if they see it, they can make some notifications. The authorization decision also conveys the terms and conditions for the authorization to operate, the authorization termination date or time-driven authorization frequency, input from the senior accountable official for risk management or risk executive function, if that information has been provided, common control authorizations, the system impact level supported by the common controls. So a lot of stuff goes into this authorization decision. There could be terms and conditions, like this system can only be operated if you complete the things that are on your plan of action and milestones according to the timelines you prescribed. It could also have things like maybe the system's risky, but it has to be operated, so it can be only operated in specific time frames, maybe during business hours or maybe during a specific quarter of the year that the system has to operate. It also includes that termination date. If your organization is under an ongoing authorization, the termination date may be to be determined or something like that. A lot of organizations will put an arbitrary 3-year timeline on that. And then obviously, if it's common controls, there's going to be information about where those common controls can be applied. For the system, the authorization decision indicates to the system owner whether the system is authorized to operate or authorized to use or not authorized to operate or not authorized to use. So these are 4 things we can get. We can get an authorization to operate or an authorization to use. And a lot of times in cloud environments where we have a FedRAMP authorization, we can get an authorization locally to use that. And on the other side, we can get a not authorized to operate or not authorized to use. Those are the things we don't want to get. That means the system can't go forward. For common controls, the authorization decision indicates to the common control provider and to the system owners of inheriting systems whether the common controls are authorized to be provided or not authorized to be provided. The terms and conditions for common control authorization provide a description of any specific limitations or restrictions placed on the operation of the system or the controls that must be followed by the system owner or common control provider. So we're providing a framework around the common controls that define how they can be used and if they can be used. So we can't inherit any common controls that are not authorized. So every common control set has to have an authorization. The authorization termination date is established by the authorizing official and indicates when the authorization expires. Organizations may eliminate the authorization termination date if the system is operating under an ongoing authorization. That is, the continuous monitoring program is sufficiently robust and mature to provide the authorizing official with the needed information to conduct ongoing risk determination and risk acceptance activities regarding the security and privacy posture of the system and the ongoing effectiveness of the controls employed within and inherited by the system. So we have 2 things here. We can get a date that's set by the authorizing official. That could be 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. It's up to the authorization official to determine that date. Or if you have a robust continuous monitoring system that's mature enough to provide the necessary information to the AO that's going to give them the details they need to determine if the system is still within risk tolerances, then under those conditions, you can eliminate the termination date and have it system under ongoing authorization. Authorization decision is included with the authorization package and is transmitted to the system owner or common control provider. So they get the packet back, and it will include the authorizing official's decision on the authorization. So is it authorized to operate? Is it not authorized to operate? Is it authorized to use, or is it not authorized to use? That information will be provided back to the system owner or common control provider. And when they receive it, they're going to respond that they're acknowledging that they understand the requirements of this approval or denial of approval. So upon receipt of the authorization decision and the authorization package, the system owner or common control provider acknowledges and implements the terms and conditions of the authorization. So if they got an authorization to operate and it says you have to comply with your plan of action and milestones, that's what they're going to do. They move the system into production and they start working on the plan of action and milestones, hitting those dates they prescribed. Those reports later, we'll see, are being provided to the authorizing official so they can ensure the system is following those requirements as defined. So the AO can put just about anything they want under the terms and conditions that meet their requirements, because remember, they're accepting the risk for this system going forward. The organization ensures that the authorization package, including the authorization decision for systems and common controls, is made available to organizational officials. That's system owners inheriting common controls, chief information officers, senior accountable officials for risk management or the risk executive function, senior agency information security officers, senior agency officials for privacy, and system security and privacy officers. These folks need to know information about the system because they need to see how it fits in the overall or overarching risk picture. They also need to know if they're inheriting from a common control set, what the issues and plans of action and milestones that are levied against those common controls. The authorizing official verifies on an ongoing basis as part of continuous monitoring, which we'll see in task M2, that the established terms and conditions for the authorization are being followed by the system owner or common control provider. So we'll see about that. When we get to M2, we'll talk about that more, but they're going to verify by reporting that the system is still on track and it's following the terms and conditions. When the system is operating under ongoing authorization, the authorizing official continues to be responsible and accountable for explicitly understanding and accepting the risk of continuing to operate or use the system or continuing to provide the common controls for inheritance. For ongoing authorization, the authorization frequency is specified in lieu of an authorization termination date. So the authorizing official is going to be still responsible after the system has gone live. They're still responsible for the system. So they're going to keep track of the risks that come up and ensure that it's complying with the terms and conditions of the authorization decision. The frequency of specified check-ins in lieu of a termination date is set by the authorizing official. The authorizing official reviews the information with the specific time-driven authorization frequency defined by the organization as part of the continuous monitoring strategy and determines if the risk of continued system operation or the provision of common controls remains acceptable. So from time to time, the AO will check in and determine if the risk is still within tolerance, if it's still acceptable to operate the system or provide the common controls. That's going to be one of the things they have to do. And in the next step, we'll provide those reports to the authorizing official to make those determinations. If the risk remains acceptable, the authorizing official acknowledges and accepts in accordance with organizational processes. If not, the authorizing official indicates that the risk is no longer acceptable and requires further risk response or a full denial of authorization. So even though the system is in operation or the common controls are being provided for inheritance, that authorization can be removed if the system or the common control set is too risky for the organization. If everything's good and the risk remains acceptable, the acceptance continues and the authorization decision remains good. The organization determines the level of formality for the process of communicating and acknowledging continued risk acceptance by the authorizing official. The authorizing official may continue to establish and convey the specific terms and conditions to be followed by the system owner or common control provider for continued authorization to operate, continued common control authorization, or continued authorization to use. So it's up to the organization to determine how the information is conveyed from the AO to the system owner or common control provider that their system or common control set is still good to go, still authorized. And this can be very formal, or it could be something as informal as an email. But it has to be documented somewhere. It just can't be verbal. There has to be some type of documentation that proves the authorizing official is continuing to accept the risk of the system or the common control set. Terms and conditions of the authorization may be conveyed through an automated management and reporting tool as part of an automated authorization decision. That's just what NIST is going to push, and that is automation. It's going to make things more efficient and more effective. So we want to make sure that if it's available, we use an automated authorization tool. If the control assessments are conducted by qualified assessors with the level of independence required, the assessment results supporting the ongoing authorization may be applied to a reauthorization. Organizational policies regarding ongoing authorization and reauthorization are consistent with laws, executive orders, directives, regulations, and policies. What we're saying here is if we do have independent assessors reviewing our system or common control set through the ongoing monitoring process, we can use those results of those assessments as part of our reauthorization process. If they're conducted by self-assessments, they may not be used in certain cases for the reauthorization. It's going to be dependent on your organization and how it's set up, but normally self-assessments are not valid for reauthorization. The assessment for self-assessment must be conducted by independent control assessors in that case. Appendix F of 837 provides additional guidance on authorization decisions, types of authorization, and the preparation of authorization packages. References to this task are Special Publication 839, Special Publication 800, 160, Volume 1. In this module, we talked about Task R4, its inputs, outputs, roles and responsibilities, SDLC and CSF lifecycle alignment, risk acceptance, authorization package review, AO consultation, dependency authorization decision, authorization termination, transmission of determination, receipt of decision, authorization package, ongoing verification, ongoing authorization, authorization review, the formality, terms and conditions, assessor independence, additional guidance, and finally we talked about the references. If any of this stuff doesn't make sense to you, I'd say go back and watch the video, at least that part again. If it all makes sense, on to the next, and if you're taking the course, on to the course material to further dive into this task.